the final votes. First, I'd like to talk about the Asian American community. Mike Wu could be the first Chinese American elected to head a major city in the nation, and whether or not Asian Americans are going to turn out to vote. I know he won a significant portion of the votes in the primary election, but does there need to be some stepping up as far as getting the vote out?
I don't think Mike Wu's strategy has ever been to target Asians for their voting bloc. I think that it's interesting to note that in Richard Riordan's 64-page blueprint for turning LA around, there was no mention of either immigrant issues or specific ethnic community issues. Those were not included in Riordan's plan for the future of Los Angeles. And I think the reason is Asians and some of the other ethnic constituencies don't really represent a strong voting bloc. I think Riordan's strategy has been to go to San Fernando Valley and the west side, where there is a more significant number of voters who will show up at the polls on election day. Mm-hmm. I think Wu's strategy has been to represent himself as a candidate that is going to be interested in the issues that affect people even if they are not registered voters. And I think that that's the difference between the campaigns. Riordan's campaign has been a very marketing-driven campaign to go for those people who will return his investment. Mm-hmm. And those people are the ones who will show up at the polls on election day.
Okay. Haywood, consultants have already said that the black vote will be a significant vote. Blacks typically vote in blocks, and they make up about 18% of the registered voters. In the primary election, Wu won over 50% of the black vote, and there were two black candidates who were in the primary, and they won a very small percentage. What seems to be the community's feeling about Wu? I mean, he won endorsements from some major church leaders, and he's also won some endorsements, some major black political figures. Will blacks come out to vote for him?
I think that will. I think also you have to look back at some of the things that Wu has done. I've been in LA for 4 years now, and shortly after I got here, I started paying attention to the political scene. And one of the things that was obvious, certain things that he would do and certain things he would stand up for indicated, and after a while, you started hearing other people on the council say, the man is planning on running for mayor. Historically, you will find that most candidates come courting the minority communities. Mm-hmm. It seems that quite often, if it's a tight race, they depend on the minority communities to swing it one way or the other for them. And that's what he has done. When the Rodney King incident first happened, and he taunted in one of his commercials. He was the first one to ask for Daryl Gates' resignation. And that was playing to the minority communities, most especially at the time, the African-American community, knowing how they felt about what had taken place. So he was preparing himself for the election coming. And yeah, a lot of African-Americans will, and other minorities that feel like they've been constantly left out, will look at Wu as someone who will help them. I think also you have to look at the point of fact that you have a Caucasian and a person of color running. And the way it has been in this country and the way it is now, most so-called minorities, which happen to be the majority, people of color, will go for the person of color. So I think that quite a few of them will vote. And like you said, they didn't vote for the two African-American candidates, but one came out of nowhere, virtually an unknown. And the other had ran before and did pretty good, but this time he was under major attack for a lot of different things that had taken place. So since there was really no strong African-American candidate, I think all the leaders, those that are called our leaders, looked around, and a lot of us looked around and said, let's go with somebody who has a better chance.
Okay.
And didn't want to isolate themselves when the outcome became the outcome, which was it was going to come down to Reardon and Wu. So, yeah, I think.
Okay.
You know.
I think that one of the differences in this election has been the emphasis placed on the need for ethnic coalition building, and which I think Reardon, until very, very recently, has made no attempt to build any kind of diverse base of support. I think Wu from the beginning has tried to represent himself as somebody whose constituency is made up of different ethnic groups, but the way it's coming out in the end is Stan Sanders, one of the candidates who did well in the primaries, has endorsed Richard Reardon for his economic plan and some promises that Reardon has made through his campaign to develop business in South Central Los Angeles. And Reardon's track record, he keeps pointing to, is his ability to go into corporations that are failing and turn them around. What we know about Richard Reardon is based primarily on his own campaign and his substantial resource that he devotes to his campaign, his marketing campaign.
Well, people are talking about Reardon's going to buy the campaign, and that brings me to the Latino vote. Gloria Molina endorsed Wu. Richard Alatorre endorsed Richard Reardon. And what's happening here? Are we going to, this campaign is going to be decided based on money?
I think this campaign, to me, it's almost parallel what we saw with the presidential election, where people want change. I mean, it's always about, well, we want something different after what we went through, especially, with the riots. They want change. And I think just the idea of change, whether Wu will do anything or whether the other candidate will do anything, is just welcome. And I do agree that minorities tend to choose a candidate of color just because that I believe they identify with the person. And I think I think voters will go out and vote just because I think they want to make a difference and they want to try and have an effect on it. And I think as far as the Latino community, I believe that just on my experience with people, they're backing Wu, I believe. I mean, there's a consensus of that.
Well, what seems to be key is voter turnout also. And I know Wu has an office he opened up early on in South Central LA to appeal to the Black and Latino voters in that area. And Richard Reardon has opened up an office in the Crenshaw district also, which is heavily Black middle class voters are in that area. Traditionally, as we all know, voters are middle class first and then white. What do either one of the candidates need to do, and particularly Wu, because his campaign in election is key? What does he need to do at this point if he wants to win? And we'll start with you, Hayward.
That's hard for me to say what he needs to do to win. I was speaking with a friend of mine yesterday who used to work in the mayor's office, who is a commentator, and he said, he told me, he said, Wu's going to get blown out of the water. Sad to say, but Wu's going to get blown out of the water. I said, well, the president came and endorsed him. He said, it doesn't matter. Wu's going to get blown out of the water. And I think there's something that's underlying to all of this. With what has taken place in the past couple of years, the riots and the Rodney King beating and Daryl Gates' resignation, and there's something else that's happening in this country that's always been there, and it's underlying, and it's coming to head again right openly. It boils down to race. It just boils down to race. white America is on the run. They know that they're losing their stronghold. Slowly but surely, they're losing their grip on controlling. Anytime, any opportunity they have to get back control of that in any shape, form, or fashion, they're going to. I just feel that things being the way they are, Reardon's going to win because he's a Caucasian man. With what happened with Daryl Gates, that was one of the last big fights. That was sort of like a Custer fight. And they may say, well, you won this little battle here, but we're going to win this war. Reardon will, I feel, be the next mayor. I think Wu, with all he's trying to do, the sympathy he has from so-called minorities, Caucasian people saying, look, we're getting beat up left and right. It's time that we get in and take it back. And Reardon, you hear him say one thing, and like we said before, when it comes to politics and politicking, everybody comes to the minority community asking for those votes. If they win, they set one or two people up and we'll hold them up throughout their tenure, see what we're doing for you, see who we got here. But overall, coming to the community and doing anything, like I said, they'll just pick out one or two people or a business or something and hold it up as, see what I've done for you people. But it goes back to taking care of Caucasian America. And with, like I said, what has taken place out here the past couple of years, the Caucasian people, the ones you don't really see, the ones with all the money, the ones who have most to lose, they're back in Reardon.
John, your prediction?
Yeah, I think Haywood is right. The one problem I think Wu's campaign has had is that he's tried to go according to standard political practice in these elections, and he is doing that with a supporter base which is not standard, which is very much the people who have been traditionally disenfranchised. But he's tried to match Reardon's campaign, his media blitz campaign, dollar for dollar, which he is not going to be able to do because Reardon has self-funded himself. He's donated something upwards to $6 million to his own campaign, which most normal Americans would not have the ability to do. I think Wu has fallen into a trap which Haywood referred to, which is Wu is looked at as a racial candidate. Regardless of what kind of positions he holds, he could be the furthest right-wing zealot, and he would still be looked at as a racial candidate because of his physical features. And I think what Wu needs to do, I don't think it's too late, is to appeal to people of color and drive home the point that regardless of what kind of promises are made and what kind of changes are suggested, Reardon's campaign will not address this fundamental problem of racial difference in the city. And I think that there are sellouts among candidates or among politicians of color. But I think Wu's track record has shown that he has spoken out when it hasn't always been politically advantageous for issues that affect people of color. And as far as Asians go, I know that there is not across-the-board support for Michael Wu, and it's exactly for that reason, because he hasn't always come down on the right side for, say, an ethnic group. Korean Americans, I know, are very, very upset with Wu's voting record on this issue about relicensing liquor stores in South Central Los Angeles. And I know that it is a very politically driven decision for Wu to support some of the legislation that is making it difficult for merchants to reopen their businesses. And this is because he is in coalition with prominent African-American city councilman Mark Ridley Thomas. And the thing that Wu needs to educate his constituency about is, there is no one position that a candidate like himself can take. that is going to appease all people.
Right.
But when it comes down to sorting through all the differences, in the United States, people are looked at as racial beings.
Right.
And if you are a person of color, whether you're Latino, African American, or Asian American, you are closer than you are to white people. And that's the way society looks at all people of color, is that they are different. And that's why the institutions in this country have been set up the way they are, because traditionally white people have organized the institutions in this country to play to those differences.
Right. Lydia, anything to wrap up that?
Yeah, well, I agree with the fact that Wu has to drive that point home that, you know, Reardon, I don't think will address the issues of the racial tension. He's more, you know, he's appealing to people, I believe, because he's talking about jobs in a time where we're going through economic problems, and he's very business-oriented in that sense. But I think, you know, what I was going to say before, finish saying before, was that people, in the Latino community, people are being appealed more to by Reardon now, because I see a change. Just, it's starting to me, you know, what I've seen in the last few weeks has been more, well, this guy, you know, he represents jobs and he represents this. They're not really looking at the fact that he's not going to address, or hasn't really addressed the issues about, you know, what are the race relations, you know, education even.
Right.
You know, has he really addressed that? No, and how is that going to change? Because the inner city schools are really the ones that are really bad, you know.
Okay.
Can I say something just real fast? Just a food for thought thing.
Okay.
Real fast. In politics, and I was looking in the campaign and the mudslinging that's going on, and it suddenly occurred to me that what you're going to wind up doing is voting for the lesser of two evils. And that's a very sad scenario, that whichever one you picked because it was less of two evils. But the bottom line is you still got an evil.
Right.
Something's wrong with that whole setup there. And that's just something I was thinking about, food for thought. What's it coming to? I mean, because as it gets closer to the end of the campaign, more and more mudslinging to become the winner. And if they'll do that for that, what will they do to, once they get in and to stay in and to succeed in what they want to do? I just thought it was very interesting.
You know, another issue that has highlighted our lives here in Los Angeles for at least the last 2 years is the Rodney King beating incident. In the second trial, there was a lot of preparation for a riot that was supposed to happen. And as we all know, it didn't happen. It was a big non-event. I know I went out to the site of where it all began on Florence and Normandy, and there must have been nearly 100 media crews waiting for something to happen, waiting for the first match to burn, the first person to get upset, and nothing happened. I'm wondering, was that really the media's doing? Did we almost create a riot, or was it the city, overall city officials who basically needled us in providing us with information regarding the training and preparation that was going just in case a riot happened? Lydia, what's your feeling on that?
You know, during the time of the, you know, where the jury was meeting, I mean, I remember I work out in Burbank, and, you know, that area was not affected by the riots. But everyone, every day, constantly, you know, well, what's happening? You know, go to the television, let's look at, see what's going on. And I thought it was really bad the way, you know, you have this thing where it's going to happen, it's going to happen. People were afraid. People were always nervous about everything. People, I remember one time they're like, well, the riot, you know, they're going to come to a decision, let's not come to work that day. And it was very disconcerting, and I thought it was, the media really was blowing it, I think, out of proportion and kind of almost expecting and wanting something to happen. And I strongly disagreed with the way that happened. Whether city officials had, you know, were fueling that fire, I'm not really sure, but what I saw was the media really just going out and waiting for things to happen, like planning themselves over in Florence and Normandy and expecting something. And I think that was a very, to me, a very bad thing to do because people were just very afraid and nervous.
John is a reporter, and I know I was out covering the event. And were we just merely doing our jobs by reporting the news that was going on? The city officials making preparations, the police department training, the sheriff's department training, or were we actually, inciting?
I think nobody can accuse the media of being overly creative, and I think the news organizations in the city during that period leading up to the verdicts being announced failed. They were not just doing their jobs. I think they failed to ask some very important and salient questions that are raised when you focus attention to what is happening in the city. And I think most news organizations stopped at when they asked the question, is the city scared? Of course the city is scared. There's any number of places you could go and find somebody who would articulate their fears about what may happen.
So then those images of those Korean merchants who were allegedly marauding through the streets, preparing, arming, were they wrong that flashed across the news that were in the newspapers?
There were, I think there was maybe two dominant images in regard to Korean merchants. One is that they were heavily armed, and often we saw pictures of merchants carrying machine guns and other weaponry, or they were making purchases. The other is that there were vigilante patrols that were combing the city, and that is a carryover from what happened last spring.
But were they inaccurate?
Yeah, I think clearly they were overblown. If you look at Western Gun Shop, which appeared probably on almost every major network news program, as well as local television. It appeared in the LA Times, the New York Times, probably half a dozen other national publications. Time magazine ran a big story on LA. And Western Gun Shop was found in all of those portrayals. Western Gun Shop is about the size of a walk-in closet, and it's located on Western Boulevard. It's the only legal gun dealer in Koreatown. And the reason why all the media stopped at Western Gun Shop is because of this idea that they had in their minds that Korean merchants were arming themselves. Western Gun Shop, at the height, at the most frenzied buying, was selling 20 weapons a day.
To who?
Their clientele was Korean American. But if you take that 20 weapons a day and compare it to the 650,000 weapons that were sold in California during the months after, each month after the riots and also leading up to the verdicts, that's a significant portion of guns that were not being purchased by Korean American merchants or by the African American gangbangers, who were probably second in being displayed on newspapers as bearing weapons. Who else was purchasing those guns?
Right.
And that's one of the stories that was missed. And as reporters, we should have been asking questions. Why is it that Korean merchants reappear over and over and over again in these portrayals about the city arming itself?
Right. Haywood, as a photojournalist, what's your feeling on this?
My feeling is that I see the producer holding his hand up, and I really could really want to get into this without having to break up on it. When you say media, first of all, let's get something straight about the media per se that we keep hearing about hyping this. Who is the media? 99% of the media is Caucasian people.
Okay.
The stations are owned by Caucasian people. The print is owned by Caucasians. Radio by Caucasian. When you talk about the media and talk about Caucasian people hyping what they were hyping, the few minority-owned media outlets, they weren't in the national spotlight hyping this. What you had were Caucasian reporters
Going to the hot spots?
going to the hot spots. You had Caucasian news directors, and something else that's so very important is ratings. Sometimes journalism gets lost in the ratings. And so that's one thing I really want to get clear, and more time could be spent on it. When you talk about media, talk about the fact that it was Caucasian people doing this. And like I said, I really have several things to say about this in particular, what John was commenting on. So, but I see the producer has put that, so we'll cut it.
Okay. I'd like to thank you all for joining me today on Final Edition. John Lee, Lydia, and Haywood. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, what?